and welcome to today's cybersecurity snippet, where I'm joined by Ben and Paul from Siemens Digital Industries. Today we're going to be talking about cybersecurity standards and legislation and how that impacts both globally and on the UK markets. Just to dive right in, so Paul, we've been talking about cybersecurity a lot historically at Siemens, but there's been a lot of changes recently with regulation. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and what's relevant to us?
Yeah, a big change really with regards to, firstly, the European market, with regards to the European Cyber Resilience Act, the CRA, and also the introduction of NIS2. These have been worked on for some time, really came to fruition in the latter half of last year, in October and November of last year. And they are given a period now of 36 months where implementation within Europe will start to take place. And alongside that, we had in the King's Speech earlier in 2024 that the UK would have a cyber bill as well, cybersecurity bill. And that's just been released into the market. So for the first time, we've seen what context that is being looked at in and the way it's going to be introduced into the UK and what effect that will have on industry. But we do have to look further afield as well with regards to other frameworks, security frameworks that are taking place in the US with NIST, in Asia, Australia even. There are different frameworks now that are being introduced from a cyber security perspective that ultimately affects our global trade.
What about yourself, Ben? How have you noticed cybersecurity has been changing when discussing it with customers or internally in Siemens?
I think the main shift we've seen is that previously the legislation was only really affecting people working in things like critical national infrastructure, so your water companies, energy, transport, things like that. So you had the people who had to do it from a legislative point of view, and then you also had the people who were being proactive and trying to get ahead of the game and seeing cybersecurity as part of their business risk. The shift is that soon everybody working in industry is going to have some sort of legislative reason to look at cybersecurity, and a lot of that's linked into safety as well.
So you mentioned the changes that are happening globally. How does that impact us here in the UK?
Well, the UK generally is part of the global supply chain, and that means we have to, as UK PLC, we will have to look at the way that we have to accommodate legislation globally. And this means having to look at the demonstration, this demonstration of due diligence of compliance. So whatever is created for us to have to reference to, we will have to demonstrate that competence and compliance. That means we've got to look at standards. We have to look at the way that we need to demonstrate that. That's going to be the task of our industry. That's going to be a big commitment that our industrial community will have to take on board. It's no longer just a case of producing a product for the use within any particular solution. There's now further identification that you've got to build in around the product and the solution, etc., in order to demonstrate that comment again of due diligence. And these are the things that's going to be coming in, and that's the flow down that we will start to see. Within the supply chain, whether you're working, as you mentioned before, critical national infrastructure or defence industry, regardless of industry going forward, you will find that there's a flow down of compliance that we'll need to demonstrate. And as Ben mentioned, safety. If you look at the amalgamation of security and safety and the way that they are now being incorporated into one certification, then you're going to see a lot more. The companies will have to demonstrate that level of compliance. So for us in global trade, it's something we have to acknowledge, we have to accept, and also then we have to commit to being able to comply with.
And I think what's interesting is that it's relevant to you wherever you sit in that supply chain. So if you're the operator of an industrial site, whether that's a manufacturing site or an energy site, whatever it might be, you've got a requirement to be cyber secure, but then you can also put that requirement down to your supply chain of the people who are integrating those systems and also the people that are supplying the products into those systems. So you need the individual building blocks to be secure. The people who are then building those blocks into the system, they need to be doing that in a secure way. And then the people who look after the system also have to look at the cybersecurity. So everybody has their part to play, and that's what this legislation is really pointing towards.
So if we're making the comparison back to safety, which has happened quite a few times, we've been discussing this, could people be speccing on cybersecurity? Could people be making it a requirement in the same way as safety?
Absolutely, yes. Short answer.
Yeah.
And there is, yeah.
If you look at the safety is quite mature with regards to compliance. It has been since the change in the machinery directive back in 2006. You started to see more levels of competency being included into a safe design, and that's really what we're seeing now. And one of the analogies that I draw to is like the Wild West. If you can imagine the Wild West, the cowboys and the marshals are now coming into the security world, and by doing that, legislation and the requirement for standards is going to become more important. It's exactly the same. The process is exactly the same as what you see with safety. And that due diligence, again, that term is what needs to be provided now from a security perspective, exactly the same that's been happening now for many years with regards to safety.
And you can see why that is, because a lot of safety systems run over Ethernet networks, for example. The safety systems have intelligent controllers as part of them. So if you had a cyber attack which affected that network through a denial of service attack or affected the controller through malware, then that safety system's not going to do its job anymore. So that's why the two are so closely linked, because a cyber attack could have a real implication on people's safety or environmental safety.
For us in the UK and for many of our customers, Europe is our closest trading partner. How can our customers keep informed about what impacts them most?
Okay, so there are three main regulations that we think it's worth knowing about in the European market. So if you're supplying into Europe, these three are worth reading up on and getting your head around. First is something called NIS2, which is live now, and this is mainly going to be affecting people who are what we call end users, the people who are operating industrial equipment in Europe. If you're supplying into those European end users, then you need to be aware of NIS2. Secondly is the machinery regulation, which is coming into play in the next couple of years, and also the Cyber Resilience Act, or the CRA, you might hear it referred to as. The challenge with these European legislations is they're very broad in their scope, and they're also very deep in the number of topics that they're asking people to look at. So we always recommend looking at international standards like IEC 62443 to help align yourself with all of those three that I've just mentioned.
So what is that effect here in the UK then, Paul?
Well, the UK, as I said right at the beginning of this conversation, is developing their own bill with regards to cybersecurity. It's just been released. It's widely available now. One of the areas that I'm quite concerned about is that, unlike the Cyber Resilience Act or unlike NIS2, it's not in any way referencing product. Now, when you start to put these systems together, very similar to what we do and we talked about with safety, we have a term called presumption of conformity. That means that what you've used from a product perspective, you can presume meets the requirements. That goes a long way with companies being able to demonstrate that compliance element to it. And what is missing from the bill that has been raised within the UK is that reference to product and the use of product and the certification of product. At the same time, we're adopting NIS2. So if you read the document, it references NIS2. So the cyber assessment frameworks that we use in the UK for critical national infrastructure, so the CAFs as they're called, these are going to be enhanced. They're going to be referencing NIS2. But then we have to look at the way that we present that term again of due diligence. How do we present it within the technical file? Because we're not sure about UKCA. We're still being told CE is relevant and really relevant with regards to the bilateral trade agreement we have with Europe. So we still have to look at CE, but CE now has a new set of directives that it's referenced to. So where we used to have 24 directives, we now have 25 directives, including a legal framework, the Cyber Resilience Act. And this is the ambiguity and the confusion I think that the UK is going to find themselves in. Actually, what do they do in order to demonstrate compliance? Because at some point they have to follow legislation. We know that 62443 is going to be a harmonised standard. So therefore, that should give us the ability to have presumption of conformity. But then that's not mentioned in the bill. So there's a disconnect that really needs a lot of discussion about, in order that we need to align, especially when we're talking about CE market, declaration of conformities and declaration of incorporation, all these documents that we have to create. We need to have clarity as to actually how do we create them. And therefore we have a little bit of a grey area between what's happening in the UK and what's happening in Europe. But from a trade perspective, we have got to make sure that we're aligned. Our biggest trading partner is Europe. And then we have to look further afield and we look at what's accepted globally. CE is accepted globally. So we need to be aware of how we're going to trade globally by utilising directives, legal frameworks, and also harmonised standards to be able to demonstrate that level of compliance.
So you can see how complex it is just in the UK market and with Europe, but we've got to remember that there's also legislation going on in Asia, there's also legislation going on in America and elsewhere. And for a company like Siemens, as an example, we operate across the whole globe, and a lot of people who are based in the UK and Ireland will also be supplying across the whole of the world. So we really need one standard way of approaching cybersecurity, which is going to tick the boxes for all the things Paul's just mentioned, the European legislation, what will eventually come in the UK. But also, we don't want to have to be redesigning our products or redesigning our solutions to sell the same thing into Asia or into North America. So that's where we standardise on the 62443 set of standards, because 62443 is referenced in all of the European directives, it's referenced in the States, in Asia. It does align you wherever you want to be working. So that's why, as an example at Siemens, we've been working to 62443 for a number of years in our factories and designing our products and our solutions.
And one of the areas to stipulate now is that with this conversation and we're having is around operational technology. There's the IT, information technology, that bolts alongside this, and more we're seeing the alignment of the two. The 27000 series of standards is also applicable, and then not to be ignored, but they need to complement and work with what we're trying to do in the OT. And that 62443 standard, again harmonized in Europe, is going to be really important globally, alongside the traditional ISO 27000 series of standards. So alignment is critical for customers going forward. And what we want to try and do as Siemens is to make that transition between the two different technologies as seamless as possible.
What we really like about 62443 is it basically takes the good bits and the applicable bits of the 27000 series. It says some of that we can just copy and paste in the OT world, but we can't copy and paste all of it because it is a different world and we're doing different things in operational technology. So if you're an engineer and you start reading the 62443 standard, you'll realise that it's kind of speaking your language. It's talking about the type of technologies that you'll be using every day, which you probably wouldn't find in the IT world.
Picking up on what you said about Siemens using 62443 in our own factories, tell us a little bit more about how we comply in-house to support our customers in our services as well.
Okay, so there are two main ways. 62443 is a big set of standards, divided into 4 sections, and it's the 4th section that we focus on with our products and in our factories. So the first bit, 4-1, if you want to get technical, is about how our factories are run and our product lifecycle management process, so how we design our products, how we make them. And we've got certificates that show that we do the right things and that we are following the standards, and our factories across the globe, whether they're in Germany or North America or Asia, have got these certificates. So it's not just us saying that we're doing it, we've had independent auditors come in and show that. So the first part is the factory and the second part is the product itself. So part 4-2 of the standard is basically saying what security features has your product itself got that allows you to, as I said earlier, have those building blocks built into a bigger system. So you could use the example of a managed switch. A managed switch will have security features like port blocking, it will have security features like VLAN, which all add up to having 4-2 compliance, but it's the factory itself that also needs to be secure, and that's the 4-1 bit.
Bringing this into our service business a little bit more, we provide 62443 assessments as well, don't we, Paul? And that's built on our sort of how our Siemens standard is so intertwined with the 62443 standards. We can then support customers on their journey as well, can't we?
Yeah, we can, and we've done that for probably 8 years now. In the early days of the development of 62443 as a standard, we carry out audits, predominantly and generally focused on operational technology, so the OT, the manufacturing, the industrial control area. And from that, we develop a report for the customer that not only highlights their deficiencies, but also we highlight mitigation. How do they actually develop the compliance needed to demonstrate that their plant is running correctly? That's a hard task. Some customers don't see the benefit from what we are trying to provide as yet. So the maturity of our customers is still low. They see it as a nice to have, not something that they should have. So that's an evangelistic type approach that we have to experience with the sales process, is to get across to the customer that why they need those particular audits. Then we have to work with them where the benchmark is for where their plant should be. And the baseline for integrated control systems is security level 2 of the 62443. And again, that's an educational process on their understanding how they develop their solution, how they create their demarcation zones, etc. And then finally, it's the application of the product that Ben was mentioning. You can't achieve security level 2 unless you have 4-2 compliant product. So all of this comes together, but in that process you're also educating the customer, because yes, it is drinking our own champagne, but now it's a requirement for the complete market. It's not just Siemens. Mm-hmm. We have got to take our knowledge and then allow our customer to be educated and let them be able to themselves define their requirements for their plant, but again based on harmonized standards and meeting the directives that we're now seeing coming from Europe, but also that will be coming from the UK as well. So it's an educational piece. Mm-hmm. Being an evangelist in that way is difficult sometimes within the sales process. Trying to educate the customer at the same time you're in a sales role, you're having to sell that service. That's a difficult balancing act, but it's one that will become a part of the normal conversation going forward. It'll be part of everything we do as around any form of network, any form of service that we're developing will have security at the core.
I think we can appreciate that there is a lot going on with standards at the moment and regulation, and to just help to demystify that, 62443 is what we would definitely encourage our customers to look at, and that's what we're looking for here at Siemens. What is your one key message that you'd like to share with our audience and they can take away?
From my side, as one former Prime Minister once said, but he went for education, preparation, and preparation. What our customers need to do is to become aware, become more mature in what's happening, and then prepare for it. That's educating themselves, but it's you've got 3 years, 36 months now. Prepare.
And mine would be, building on what Paul's just said, regardless of whether you're a product supplier in operational technology or a system integrator, a machine builder, or an operator yourself, this legislation is coming down the road. If you're supplying into Europe, it's already there in some cases, and we've already heard about what's coming in the UK as well. So regardless of where you sit in that supply chain, you can't ignore this. And like Paul said, it's time to prepare.
Okay, thanks very much, guys. I think the key message is that we need to prepare, legislation's coming, and the best our customers can do is educate themselves so that we know where we are with cybersecurity and how it can impact them.